In Austin's oldest cemetery, researchers are on a mission to find the descendants of people of color who are buried there.
Thousands of markers on what's called the historic colored grounds are missing for various reasons. But the city's new project aims to create a 3D model of monuments to remember them.
KVUE's Darenisha Heron spoke to researchers about their efforts to make sure people buried in Oakwood Cemetery aren't forgotten.
In the middle of a city where change is the only constant, is a place where the past and present intersect, and time stands still.
This was the first burial place in the city of Austin once the city was inhabited.
This is the historic Oakwood Cemetery.
It had probably been a good 10 years since I'd visited the cemetery.
Architectural historian Tara Dudley says what you see on the surface here tells only part of Oakwood's story.
With the differences in socioeconomic status and race, there are parts of the cemetery that are less documented and less well taken care of.
The cemetery was segregated at one point, but even affluent status couldn't save the markers of some who were buried in what's called the historic colored grounds.
We're walking toward the marker that commemorates Jacob Fontaine, and after emancipation, he went on to found several Baptist churches, published this newspaper, the Gold Dollar, one of the first African-American newspapers that was established west of the Mississippi River. You have this amazing founding figure of Austin who's buried in the colored grounds, but we have no idea where.
Looking around, you would think the cemetery was full, but as we walk through the colored grounds, it's clear where some pieces of history are missing.
A lot of the empty space that you see here is not because there aren't individuals interred there. There likely are. We just don't have markers for those persons.
300 markers scatter these 3 acres, but more than 2,700 people are buried in the colored grounds, from slaves to the rich to everyday folk.
People of marginalized communities whose histories are continually erased or covered up in historical narrative.
Some headstones are eroded or broken. Other materials like wood markers uprooted. Some people couldn't afford markers at all.
What are the specifics? What were their names?
Gregory Ferrer is an exhibit specialist at the chapel. It took him months of digging through what he calls an unorganized database to try and answer those questions. Some of the buried were marked as unknown, but Ferrer was able to find a few dozen family names dating back to the 1860s.
Having a record of them and acknowledging them, by name if we have a name, is at least a very good start.
Ferrer says his list could match up with some of the 36 remains found under the chapel and reinterred in 2021. Those remains were found during a restoration project, but now chapel staff, along with researchers like Dudley, are working on a new project to find descendants of African, Mexican, Native, and European Americans buried on the colored grounds.
We were actually awarded a National Endowment for the Humanities grant.
And that grant will help create a 3D representation of what the grounds could look like if things were properly documented.
Using our call for descendants, we've also started conducting some oral history interviews.
Ferrer knows how it feels to amplify the voices of ancestors.
This is my family's lot.
8 of his family members, all on his mother's side, are buried at Oakwood. And while the Loving Good family has markers, it wasn't until 2019 that Ferrer was able to find details about his great-great-grandfather, Reuben Shannon Loving Good.
RS's task was to officially open Samuel Houston College as its first initial president.
Samuel Houston College, now known as Houston-Tillotson University.
Being able to connect with that branch has just been a very special thing, especially being out here in Austin, being in a place where, they lived and worked and they did a lot of amazing things.
A feeling Ferrer hopes to bring to other descendants soon. Because of this research, scarcely documented history has already been unveiled.
Even in the people that we know about from that time period in Austin's history, I had seen nothing written about this man.
Despite inaccuracies in data and thanks to an old advertisement,
So Thomas Hill died October 1886.
Dudley found the marble tombstone of Thomas Hill, a black, affluent builder and business owner in Austin during the late 1800s.
And this man was such a big deal, such well off, so civically involved in the black community in Austin, but not just the black community, the white community as well, because his entire will was printed in the newspaper to indicate that this man was a man of means. It's important to understand the past so that we can understand the present. I feel like the ancestors, are speaking, and they want their stories told.
Stories told to repopulate history not just within this cemetery, but in Austin's history, before the city's growth buries what these people meant to this world. In East Austin, I'm Darenisha Heron.
Great story, Darenisha, thank you. Researchers are looking for more descendants of people buried at Oakwood. If you believe you could be a descendant, contact the Oakwood Cemetery Chapel. We have details in this story on our website. That, of course, is KVUE.com.